I'm Rob Scott, the Chair of Arbor Victoria, which is a subcommittee of the National Arbor Organisation. So welcome to the AGM. Sorry for the technical challenges here. Now, acknowledgement of country. Arbor acknowledges the traditional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander custodians throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and future, for they hold the memories, traditions, culture and hopes of Indigenous peoples across the nation. We're in country that was never ceded. If you'd like to post the country where you are in the chat box to acknowledge the land you're on, please do. Now, there's going to be some polls, online polls tonight, which Suzanne's just, before I even start, can I just say a huge thank you to Suzanne. She's done an amazing effort in getting an online Zoom and AGM functionality going, and so there'll be a few polls to for the AGM, but also just to register who's present tonight and whether people are members, and to what this one's so what's this poll about, Suzanne? The first one.
Sorry, this yep, I'm just, so this one is just to get an overview of who's here and what areas of bush regen that they are in.
Yep. Okay. And so because it's a meeting rather than a presentation, only a presentation, everyone's mics are live, so please mute yourselves during the presentation. And then at the Q&A part of it, you can unmute and be asking questions. And it's also possible to.
Oh, sorry, can I just interrupt, Rob?
Yeah.
Evidently we don't have a Q&A in this function. It's just the chat, and Alex is monitoring the chat. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, so there won't be a live Q&A.
We will have the Q&A. There's just not a question and answer functionality in the meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse the thunder in the background. Hopefully I don't lose my my power again. So you can supposedly you can put the thumbs up if you agree with someone's question, just to reinforce it. There goes. Reinforce that. I better mute my microphone. Yeah, we'll move on to the agenda for tonight. So Suzanne, do you want to chuck that one up there? Yep. You've just got that polls.
Yep.
One.
Okay. Oh.
Have I got that there? Yep. So we've got a half an hour, about 20 minutes, Craig, a half an hour, 20-minute presentation from Craig McGrath from the City of Yarra, who very innovatively used the national standards to help formulate the City of Yarra's bushland contract management model. And it's been used for a couple of years now, two or 3 years now. So it's a good chance to see how the national standards can be used in managing a contract in bushland management to perhaps inform the progress that's being made in improving the bushland. So just welcome to Craig. He's an old colleague of mine. We've been working together since 2001, and or roundabout then, Craig. I don't know exactly; it's too far back now, but yeah, about that. And yeah, so Craig's been involved in community engagement and bushland restoration in the City of Yarra, and been steering some great initiatives in a really green council, what's turned into a very green council. It's always been an innovative council. It's in a city, so it's got the Yarra River flowing through it, but it's a great example of inner urban restoration. So yeah, Craig, would you like to say anything else to introduce yourself?
May as well jump into just starting the show, I guess. Rob, we'll get the ball
Okay.
if you like. Everyone's
okay.
happy with that. We'll just hit the ground running, and I've tried to condense it pretty short to a short thing. And I think these are the kind of events that you just good to get everyone in the same kind of virtual room, and have that opportunity to just, I guess, to shoot a bit of that about what's going on in everybody else's world and how this stuff might assist them. So I might just get up the presentation now, do the share screen. And there we go. How's that looking, people?
Yep.
Is that everybody okay with that? They can see that?
Yep.
Turn my.
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. Craig McGrath, Biodiversity Officer at the City of Yarra, and also been on the Arbor Committee for a few years now, and great group of people too, and some fantastic information and initiatives go through the group. So I'm really, really proud to be a part of that group. I'll just quickly click into the next one. I'm assuming that there was an acknowledgement at country, but I'm living in Banyule, working at the City of Yarra, and I'd like to acknowledge the Woiwurrung people. Wurundjeri Woiwurrung is traditional owners of the true sovereigns of the land I'm presenting from, and collectively let's also acknowledge the significant contributions made by other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to life across the country. We pay our respects to our elders from all nations here today and to their elders past, present and future. Moving on to the next thing, just thanks, Rob, for giving us a bit of an idea where the City of Yarra is. So I realise we've got some people from Hornsby and everywhere else. So I thought I'd throw the G in the bottom corner there, the MCG, since we're smashing the Poms in the cricket at the moment, which is fantastic. About 20 years ago, we were 70,000 people, and now we're 94,000. So that's what population growth does. We've just gone up, and there's not really been a lot more open space developed. That said, there's been a lot more pressure on open space. So if you've got other people here who are dealing with the hazards and trials and tribulations of urban open space, I feel your pain because I'm in that space too. Our biggest green patch, if you can see that map on the right-hand side there, is Yarra Bend Park. That's where the grey-headed flying fox population is. There's around about 20 to 25,000 in summer, and it dwindles down to about 5,000 during winter. We think it's because there's not enough nectar resources in the Yarra area, but that's one of the largest plots of land close to the city, and it certainly is a big corridor for wildlife movement, so that's pretty critical. In the City of Yarra, there's some stats about how big we are. In 2014 to 2016, we got the Biodiversity Health Survey done, which is a really amazing piece of field data. So we actually had robust information to go on. When we're talking about benchmarking in this world, we had 209 vascular plant species identified, and we had a few threatened species as well, Nankeen night heron, another one. And just recently, 2021 to 2020, we got our nature strategy endorsed, which means we start pushing the envelope about increasing biodiversity values through the City of Yarra. So we also take in that consideration the 7 seasons. There's a bit of argy-argy, but that's a reference to 7 seasons of Wurundjeri culture, about how the ebb and flow of these landscapes work. So that's just a quick overview of where we are. 2017 was a pretty significant time for us. We got some fantastic research done by Practical Ecology. I don't know if Lincoln's online at the moment, but they got us a lot of detailed field data on habitat zones. So that was really instrumental in assisting with that process. And of course, how big is the City of Yarra? Well, it's just me. I'm the EFT who manages the contract. I do have some consultants budget to work with, and I was also pushing to get a phone app started to start collating this information. So I've talked about Fulcrum and other areas where I do a few different things with that, mainly that reporting and monitoring. And of course, critical to the SERA standards is to get some concise and ongoing auditing of all the sites. So I changed it around a little bit for some of the lower class sites. They don't change too rapidly. And for some of the high class sites, we monthly audit them. So that's an interesting phase about how that relates, how the bushland contract is being driven by the SERA standards. And of course, we also have, we classify sites into some of the better sites, into some of the poorer sites, some that might have calpac weeds. I've got a slide a little bit after that. So just to describe where the contractors' targets need to align. And of course, we've got funding constraints like everything else. Being an outcome-based contract, we've got a level that we'd like the contractors to achieve. It's up to them how they go in some ways to achieve it. But we're not counting hours on how many hours have been put in. It's just, let's try and get these outcomes you know, on the board. And that's where the SERA standards come in, because it gives them an opportunity to ask the right questions at the right time. And that's why, and that was why we took on the SERA standards, just perfectly timed. I think the first iteration was 2017 in later in that year. So it was a perfect storm for us. We had 2017 when we had great field data. We had a contract coming up for renewal the following year, and we had the SERA standards recovery wheel coming in after that. So that was how we kind of came about. When we looked at the SERA standards, and it was fantastic for empirical knowledge. I think some of the stuff we probably couldn't get our mind or couldn't get our funding for was to do genetic sequencing. There was some soil testing that really expensive for us. Being it's just one person myself to try and do these sort of things, we had to consider what other targets might be easier targets to do with a single operator in some regard, and then using contractors to do some of the heavy lifting in terms of confirming how sites were travelling. So the way how the contract was started up, we had a 4-year target. So we gave the contractor a chance to get their grip on the sites and work out what the ebb and flow of some of these sites were. And they developed annual plans for that, and there's 4-year target plans as well. So that's a little bit of how the contract was started. So we use the SERA standards spokes. We have the contractor develop targets based on those kind of spokes. And then the way how we were assessing the sites through the SERA standards, and you've got a list of those things there, adaptive assessments, baseline inventory, we had good stuff already through practical ecology there. And the recovery systems, we had a bunch of ideas about how systems were recovering. And I'll put a dot point there about if there was remnant vegetation there, the composition of soil and topography, microclimates even. So we might preference some areas which were doing quite well in a horrible area that had a microclimate, which was quite good to get species established. So we kind of picked and choose some of our easier sites. Of course, habitat connectivity is a big one. Patch size and fragmentation is kind of killing us a little bit. So some sites will never be fantastic because of those issues. But that's what we're also looking at. And then we had a look at pollinator species in terms of trying to evidence how resilient species some areas might be. So we're having a bit of discussion internally about how do we capture that information. And of course, anthropological threats and compliance became a big issue. With so many people trying to vie for the same bit of bushland, sometimes there's just really difficult damage to get a handle on. It can be people letting their dogs off lead and things like that, digging holes through sites. That can be challenging, as well as fox control and stuff like that. So we have had these kind of 2 questions at the end there. Is the damage reversible? So that's some of the things. That's some of the reasons why we might not try to get to our class 1 site. We might just say, look, class 3, which is a fair bit down. That's what our best outcome might be. And then the other problem we have in the City of Yarra is there's no naturally occurring benchmarks. So in terms of the SERA standards, it's built on that context, but we don't actually have enough quality vegetation to achieve those things. So we had to look elsewhere. What do we do? So next slide. We ended up using the DSE benchmarks for habitat hectare assessment. So I just gave a picture there of the plains grassy woodland one, and I exposed that description of how a plant's grass land should be, or the idealized version of it. And there's a list of what kind of the kind of life forms, the percentage of life forms that you'll see at those sites. So when we do our annual assessment through an independent auditor, that's the sort of information they garner. So we kind of get the structure right, and we kind of get a bit of an idea about species diversity and species richness. So those are kind of a bit of a quick snapshot about how we're measuring the targets, and these are the kind of targets we're shooting for those life forms. This bit of I go back to again to 2017. I just in red I had the what the original SERA standards were in terms of how sites are being assessed under the natural regeneration, assisted regeneration, and reconstruction. At that time, we felt we needed 4 because and we went on an objectives kind of statement where we were trying to sustain biodiversity. But the more recent version, the 2021, there's kind of a interesting link where it's almost an outcome conversation, and I think I probably prefer to use spontaneous regeneration, but that's that's what we do. We evolve, we adapt, we evolve. And so our class 1 site, as you can see, our target is more than 80% of the EVC species are represented, and the community and structure and everything like that is going to be as would have been seen in that previous slide. So this is the community structure here. I'll just go back to this one, and then less than 5% weeds is a target as well we have in the contract. As we go down to less to sites which we're trying to improve resilience, but facilitated regeneration is definitely part of that conversation. We have less than 5% weeds and working on less than 5 noxious weeds. So these are targets we have set in the contract for that. And then as we go down to a regression of worse landscapes, or landscapes which may never get past this 25% target of the EVC with the canopy and mid-story structure focus. So because ground story is far more expensive to re-establish, sometimes we just go for the structure and try and work on and if we can get to the ground story, then that's a nice goal if we can pull the other stuff up to a certain quality level. So and that's where the SERA standard recovery wheel comes in as a really important tool for us. And of course, the lowest class, look, if we can get 2% in some of our most areas which are the most I guess overrun by weeds or have a lot of other issues, then we are in reconstruction phase and protecting biodiversity. So we actually might have some remnant stuff there. So that's kind of it. And I thought it was really important. In our Victorian meetings, we talk about the gradient of natural recovery capacity. And so this is kind of the conversations where combined regen and reintroduction can happen a bit through the spectrum there, but that's a little bit how those levels in our contract meet what we're trying to do with the SERA standards. So that's a little bit of that conversation. So I talked a little briefly about the phone app that we use. We really haven't had to change the maintenance records. That data's just collecting recording hours, chem use. So it's actually our legal stuff that we put in the phone app, and the crew, the contractor crews, they put notes and photos in there. I do monthly auditing and we do transect analysis. I found that if you do anything less than 30 meters long, you don't actually get a true indication of the site, but it's been really good in terms of improving reactive work. We get to audit higher class profile sites more regularly, and we get to monitor risks and hazards and threats and things like that. Particularly with COVID, it was one of those interesting ones where we had a lot of tree damage, a lot of wind damage in Melbourne, so we were able to get crews out a lot faster by using that app. And of course, we have the independent annual auditor, and they do a habitat terror assessment, mainly in late spring now. The app also assists in pre-populating data fields for plant species, weed species. And one of the other things that we do too is we give the contractor, the auditors, species lists that have been planted that year or the last couple of years. So they have can dial in their eyes to see some of these species which may not be seasonally too obvious at the time in late spring. This is just a quick, I just thought I'd throw up a couple of quick pictures, screenshots about how the site is. So there's a pin drop here on a transect for reserve. And the next one is just that site and just a bunch of information there about what the EVC is in the second screen, what the orientation of the transect was, how many paces, and then all those other things for the recovery wheel, the information is kind of sitting there, but they're slightly different to what you're used to seeing. We just needed to try and find some other things to represent physical conditions, species composition, community structure, all those things. We try to find ways that would allude to that there might be a change, a measurable way to see change in those spaces. I'll just go to the next screen here. This is the table that sits behind our recovery wheel. So the attributes are the same, absence of threats, but in talking through that, we've got a reference to site damage, which is unrelated to compliance. But for us in local government, we do have a compliance option. So one of the things we're trying to do is drive and better investment in council compliance officers. We're a bit short-staffed at the moment, so to increase surveillance and reduce vandalism would be fantastic for our bushland areas, which have been, some of them being trampled, and we've got mountain bike damage and things like that. I think a lot of other councils have been dealing with that too. Soil attributes are critical, so we want to kind of measure those things, obviously, and then you can just read those things. Species composition, we talk about animals. EBC representation, we look at the number of life forms, but we might change that since our recent meeting. And of course, exotic species invading areas. We've got baseline figures. We just talked about those as well. And then attribute 4 is the structure of the EBC. So we're measuring the mid-story, up-story, and ground story species. Yeah, the function, the ecosystem function. We're trying to record pollinators, and if we've done a planting, we're also going to evaluate the contractor's capacity to get species to establish. So we're recording what percentage they're, making sure they're going to meet their target of more than 80% establishing in those areas, and they go down to that. It's all pretty self-explanatory about habitat connectivity. I guess I might get some questions about that specifically later. I'll just look at the time. So here's that site, Hall Reserve. Here's our recovery wheel back in 2017. May, you can kind of see the spokes there. We've had to change around a few bits and pieces, but that's what that looked like then. The next one is the following 18 months later. We didn't do one straight after the contract was awarded because there's no point, the contractor really didn't have a chance to turn it around, but so we gave them a year and a bit, and that was our next independent audit. So we've got independent auditors filling in these fields. An interesting thing happened the following year, 2019, COVID hit. We had a massive area right next to it, which was filled up with Nacella, Chilean Needle grass. So we decided to expand that site to incorporate a bigger site. And so what you'll see in the next slide is, because we've incorporated that site, so we've expanded it, and that's the Chilean Needle grass site. So we got stuck into, getting rid of the Chilean Needle grass. We did a spray job. The site was heavily compacted, so we have all these problems with soil compaction and things like that, and it was pretty clay. So, oh, did I miss a slide? Anyway, and then 2020, you can see that just through that species composition, the weed cover went right down because we had to include the Chilean Needle grass site. So unfortunately for the contractor, in some ways, they got that that result, but that's the narrative, that we had to include a Chilean grass area to improve it. And so here we go. There's we ripped the area, we sprayed it, ripped the area, and you can see it's very thick basalt clay. So we actually had the right soil component in there. There's some signage up there. And this is just a picture of all the, I can't remember how many, got a couple of 100 cubic meters of recycled timber mulch there, and the boys setting out some plants, and that's just a bit of a mosaic about it like above. We had a drone shot for that, which is an interesting way to look at sites too. And here we go. You can see that the first year, as a couple of years now, that's weed cover's gone right down to basically less than 3%. We've got a little, and hardly any Chilean needle grass come back, but all the spokes have really filled up there with improving the dicot value. We were actually underrepresented in dicots there. So that's kind of a quick summary about how our recovery wheels have gone through that, just one that individual case study. And there's a before on the right hand side, but that's the after. That's what it's looking as of a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, we've got a lot of amazing recruitment of Iridium, devil's foot, things like that. So there's a lot of stuff, and strange reason there's plume grass and things like that starting to come up naturally as well. So so it's a really interesting site in terms of they had all the other right components for these things to happen. So it was, in some ways, it's good that we had the Chilean Needle grass, because then we could take it over and improve it. So we did a quick audit about how Fulcrum's going. And just recently, as of like this week, we did and we've been trying to meet the contractors for 2 years, but with COVID, we haven't been able to meet them. So we reckon we got about 80% of that assessment pretty close to good, but now we've just noticed that we might change the EBC score to species richness. And the other thing we might change out of what we're recording now is we're measuring invertebrates by species, but we might look at the number of regenerating dicots, because my assessment doesn't really pick up buzz pollinators and things like that. So that's kind of where we're taking and adapting the Fulcrum audit to meet the spokes in the recovery wheel. So thank you very much, everybody, for quickly listening to all that. Hopefully it all made sense, and yeah, happy to take questions about it.
Thanks very much, Craig. That's a huge amount of sort of information to deliver in a short time. So Alex, were you going to be fielding the questions?
Yeah, sorry, I was waiting for my window of opportunity. So Craig, Sue had a question regarding, you put up your open space hectares, but what is the area of managed bushland within the City of Yarra? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, we've got 33 hectares. 33 hectares, which is under direct management through this stuff. Every once in a while we get an outbreak on land which currently isn't, like, it's probably a class 4, but we don't consider it a site because it's not. So we do have some rectionary stuff as well, but that's basically it, 33 hectares. Yeah.
Okay, great. That was your question. Does anyone else have any questions for Craig while he's there? No, I think we've gone quiet, so we might press on. I think it was a lot.
Can I just mention, if somebody does have a question, they can just unmute themselves and ask.
Can I just ask, if no one else has got their hand up, Craig, with the initial practical ecology survey, was that the annual assessment that you were getting at, the annual independent assessment?
That's right, Rob. Yeah, they did that was the annual assessment they did. So they did a habitat hectare analysis on this throughout the whole City of Yarra. There were 80 sites which met that criteria. So they actually got an EBC score. So we have that information too, and through one way or another, we've kind of whittled down to, I think, about 74 now, because we've actually joined a couple of them together, because in some ways, in the practice, we really want to try and join as many of them together to reduce that fragmentation and the edge effect. So yeah, so that's the reason why there's less, but there's actually a greater number. So we started, I think, at the contract at about around about the 300,000 square meters, and now up to 330,000 square meters.
Question, Daniel Hirschfeld here. Sorry about the darkness. So the Chilean Needle grass area, was that that was planted out? Was that right?
Sorry, I missed that last bit. It was I think
Chilean Needle grass, that was planted out or direct seeded or something?
So yeah, so the Chilean Needle grass was pretty much bombed. We use Floop, the trademark name is Kenoff, I think, which really does well on serratic tussock, that Nacella species. Yeah, it was the other issue that we had with that was it was compacted by mowers. It's actually been mown by our open space contractors. So it quickly spread once it got in there. I think they just mowed it a couple of times, and it wasn't a high mow area. And so it's actually been compacted for quite a while. We're actually having, because it was a very, very reactive soil, the basalt there soil, we get massive cracks in there as well. So we knew we had to change the profile of the soil as well to break it down a little bit, to get some more moisture in there. So there's a combination of how do you condition the soil. We could have left it open and direct seeded. We've had great success with direct seeding, mind you, but because of the Chilean needle grass, we really wanted to go in there, knock it out with a species selective herbicide, and we only planted dicots in there. There's only dicots in there for the first year, but joining it to the next, its neighbouring plot that's got a lot of wallaby grass and a lot of monocots in there. So interestingly, between the two, we actually get a higher habitat score because we've got both, but they're not necessarily intermingled. But yeah, that was a process that we needed to just assess that soil. It was a shocking sight in terms of both the compaction and also the aspect. It was east spacing as well, so it would dry out pretty quickly as well. So that's why we needed to use mulch to retain that moisture in there as well.
So you saw some natural regeneration, and that came from the plant, the species introduced, or that came from neighbouring migrating in, or it certainly wasn't from the soil itself, because it sounded like you introduced some material. Yeah,
the funny thing is, we think that we actually had we had a lot of plume grass just pop up in there as well, but we think that the stock that was planted in there might have actually had some indige seeds in there, which is really what it kicked up there. So we think there might have been a bit of contamination at the nursery, and that's why they probably popped their heads up there. But yeah, but some of them are just popping up. Like the Iridium's amazing that it's popped its head up and it's coming up everywhere. We don't really often see the levels put at all. Yeah.
Thanks, Craig.
Craig,
Sorry, Sue's got her hand up. Did you have a question, Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, just briefly, I guess, some indication of the costs and time involved to set up the Fulcrum app.
Yeah, it took me 2 weeks. I played around with a few other things. Yeah, I played around with a few of them, and it was a very, very easy, intuitive app. It was just to drop the box in there. I mean, I had played around with iAuditor and a few other things, and that was just to get the basic maintenance stuff running. The auditing has been a bit of a changing beast, because sometimes what we've noticed in the last 3 years, measuring some things doesn't amount to much change in the way how we do business. It's nice to know that we've got a certain amount of invertebrates in an area, but it may not actually change what we're doing. So that's these are the questions we're asking, like, let's not try and record information we can't use. But then again, and the other thing it does too, you can, not that I've ever been a great coder, but you can actually do some basic coding in the background. So it'll do some calculations for you. So if you just, so if you've got a pre-populated field and you might say, oh, there's, 3 different kinds of wallaby grass and blah, 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 it'll actually just count how many items there are. So it'll actually do a life form count for you in the background if you spend a bit more time on it. So yeah, it's been one of those interesting. Yeah, to get it started, it was probably about, we had a few beta tests. So we tested for about 2 months before we said, like, okay, we're comfortable with getting this to about 80-90% right.
And what's the cost? Is there like an ongoing subscription cost?
Yeah, it's $50 a month.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's pretty, compared to other things, we'll see how things go. Internally, there's an idea that we might change to a different system, but at the moment, this is I've talked about it before. It hasn't crashed on us yet. It's compatible with any Apple or Android phone in the environment. It's been pretty robust system. And we haven't lost data. It's more probably associated with human error than anything that we might have missed a thing here or there. And the other thing it does too is you can set up a hyperlink to weather sites. So you actually get real-time weather data. So when you're doing your spray runs, for example, you can say, well, it was definitely like 12 kilometres from the northeast and what have you. You can plug that information straight in. So there's some interesting stuff we do to keep in compliance with the acts. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think we've run out of time there, but if I'm sure there's lots more people could ask Craig about. So if there's a poll available to see if people would like to receive e-news, but in the meantime, Craig, thanks so much. And it sounds like you'd give it the thumbs up so far, yeah? Your experiment.
Considering what the effort it takes us to, I'll put it this way, Robert, I appreciate the time, but the kind of data we're getting out of this program, compared to we went from a paper-based option and double handling information or triple handling it, it's just streamlined it. But the recovery wheel makes great sense to use it in tandem with the Fulcrum information we're using. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, it's really broken some new ground there. So well done, and thanks so much for preparing that talk.
My pleasure.